there's a really, really good way of ending homelessness, or certainly minimising homelessness, that doesn't involve loads of money or loads of time. It just involves you using your citizenship of this country. And what I'm talking about here is about lobbying and campaigning, but not in the way that you might be thinking of normally. So I'm not talking about big campaigns from Shelter or Crisis, looking at certain aspects of homelessness. I'm talking about lay people, citizens, just ordinary people, going into their local authority and asking very difficult questions, asking very kind of searching questions of that local authority as a means to improve understanding within decision makers of homelessness itself, about highlighting bad practice and really just bringing that wisdom that people who've been homeless and have been through services actually have when it comes to understanding what needs to improve. So the good news about this is that it's really easy. It doesn't take a lot of time. We're talking here about getting involved in local authority, local council kind of meetings and the kind of FOI process, which I'll talk about as well. The bad news is, and it's not, in one sense, it's only bad news if you look at it from a big picture. Whilst there is obviously only one central government which you can put all your lobbying effort into if you're Shelter, there's something like 300 or 300 plus local authorities around the country. So we have seen absolutely incredible improvements in Bedford Borough. We've been challenging them for about 10 years now. Group of us, basically, small group of us. And what we've seen is that if you ask good questions based on your knowledge of what's going on in the area, your intervention can lead to improvements in a number of different ways. And so I'm going to do a whole string of videos about this. There's loads of stuff we've learned, loads of kind of basically cut and paste questions that you can pose to your local authority that work on various different levels. Some of them are very adversarial and some of them are not adversarial at all. They're just kind of standard stuff. And it all comes from this idea that the people who make decisions about the way homelessness is dealt with locally often won't have any background at all of being homeless themselves and often won't have really any experience working in the sector in general. I'm talking about senior council officers here. I'm also talking about the councillors. Now, as a general rule, councillors are good people. They want to give back to their local community. They want to serve the public. They want to kind of make sure that the council is as good as it can be. But they won't often have any understanding of homelessness whatsoever. And in fact, what they often get is this kind of very twisted idea of homelessness that you get from charities. So charities often kind of all their stuff, all their publicity stuff will be about saying how, these people, they're useless, they're on drugs and they've got mental health problems and they need us to come in and save the day and help them out. And actually, those kind of messages you get from charities are incredibly unhelpful and they're not true as well, which is kind of, I guess, the key thing there. So really what these questions are designed to do is to inform councillors who are in these kind of housing committee type setups, who are making these big decisions about where does the money get spent, what needs to be improved, how does the system improve, all that kind of stuff. And it gives them, I guess, a fresh perspective on what they need to be focusing on. And so, as I say, I've got something like 25 questions lined up that we've seen work in Bedford, and I'll explain how they worked in Bedford. I'm just going to break them into little bite-sized chunks. I'm not going to do all 25 in one video. I'm just going to go through and explain what the question was and where it came from and why it worked, and essentially what impact it then had. And just a little bit of background as well. Most councils will have a committee that deals with housing that is open to members of the public, where members of the public can just basically send the question in advance, in email, and either turn up on the night and actually ask the question, or they don't actually have to often just get someone else to ask the question for you if you're a bit shy. There are a couple of councils I'm aware of where you can't get access to the housing committee, but there still will be committees. There will certainly be the full council committee, which is like the overall one, where any member of the public or any constituent, any resident of that district will be able to ask questions. And so if you don't have the option of going to a housing committee, if there's not an open one for you, then simply just go to the full council. And what you probably find is quite quickly they might review the fact that no one's allowed to go to the housing committee, because the full council does not want to be having lots of good questions coming in from the public. They want to kind of keep things under wraps often, kind of keep the politics and the kind of the face and all that sort of stuff showing the right way. So they don't want someone who actually knows what they're talking about coming in and asking these kinds of questions. And there's a whole range of different ways you can ask these questions. You can also use the Freedom of Information system as well, which I'll talk about as well. But generally speaking, most questions that I would have originally put to FOI, I actually just ask in a housing committee now. So I'll give you a really good example. So the first question I'm going to cover here is a question we've asked a number of times to the council, which is simply, how many children are currently in council temporary accommodation? And actually that figure is publicly available online. You can go on the government's central government's statistics and you can basically come up with that number. But the reason you ask it in a public meeting is it immediately gets past this idea that homelessness is all about, you know, people using drugs and people with mental health issues and people who are chosen to be homeless, and it immediately gets down to a very grim reality which is very difficult for them to politically avoid. And when you have these open meetings, not all the time, but quite often, you're going to have local democracy reporters. So, you know, in the local press, your local rag will have people who are either part of their newspaper organisation or kind of working for another organisation, sitting in those meetings and reporting back what they hear. And a question like that, how many children are currently in temporary accommodation? Because the answer will probably be hundreds in most areas, I'd have thought, certainly scores. Bedford, it's something like 500, I think. I don't know, maybe 700 now, I don't know. But the point is that by asking that question, you're immediately cutting through that nonsense that you get from charity sector, and you're getting into actually very clear harms that temporary accommodation is doing. You might kind of talk about families who've been B&Bs for more than 6 weeks, because again, that's kind of a legal kind of thing you're not supposed to do. But just asking that question of how many children are in temporary accommodation at the moment, you might also ask how much has that number changed over time? Has it gone up? Has it gone down? That often then leads on to questions like, how does the council identify suitable accommodation for those families if the child's at school, for example? So you can kind of see how you can get like a theme going on through multiple meetings, and you're just basically funneling down to work out, you know, or to make a point, basically using these questions. So that question of how many children are in temporary accommodation at the moment is just a very good one, because actually a lot of the councillors won't have any idea of what the actual number is. I'm not saying you should go and try and catch them out, but I'd imagine most councillors just won't have their eye on the ball. They don't even know what to look for. That's the issue. They don't have a background in housing, don't have a background in homeless services. What they will have is some kind of idea that if, you know, where constituents have contacted them and asking for help, but often that'll be quite skewed by different things that kind of get a bit complicated. So a question like that is just a nice leveller. It's not adversarial. It's just, you know, it's a question which is good to know. It should be kind of publicised anyway. It is publicised anyway, but it should be widely known locally, because it cuts to that kind of idea of what homelessness is really about. And where you have kind of this mentality within some members of the public where, you know, homeless services is a waste of time and it's, you know, it's just people who don't deserve it. If you cut through that and just ask the question about children, you're kind of actually getting around that quite well. So another big question that we've used in Bedford several times and in different ways is a question about what training the housing officers get. We've actually done freedom of information requests around the country. So a couple of ones stick out to me. We maybe FOI'd about 20 councils and asked, you know, literally what training did the housing officers get? Leeds, I remember, came back to say basically all the training was internal, so they didn't get any external training at all, which is fine as long as the manager who's doing the training actually knows what they're doing. And I've had dealings with Leeds City Council before, which would suggest that might not be the case. There might be some issues there. So again, that kind of highlights an issue with Leeds where there is no independent, kind of decent quality training that's going in there. It's going to depend on the quality that internal manager is actually providing. Another one which kind of made me laugh really, I made a FOI to North Northants Council, asked the same question, you know, what training do housing officers get under the Housing Act 1996, which is the key bit of legislation. And the response came back to saying, oh, we don't really use the Housing Act 1996, we use the Homelessness Act 2004. And I'm like, what? You know, that homeless application process has absolutely nothing to do with the 2004 Act. And immediately that kind of made me think these guys really don't know what they're doing. And I asked that question on the back of a complaint I was making, which got upheld and got someone compensation, as just kind of a way of making that point. So that's examples of Leeds in North Northants. Other councils you'll find will use good organisations like Shelter, where you can kind of trust that it's good stuff. You'll have other organisations that get maybe more dodgy organisations doing their training, which I probably won't name in this video, but I'll probably talk about elsewhere. So you kind of get an idea of, you know, what are the housing staff actually being told? Because if you go back to kind of basics, there's no qualification that you need to be a housing officer. Often you don't need any experience. Often you will literally just get a sideways move in from whatever customer service centre in the council or something like that. And so you've got a bunch of housing officers who don't have any kind of grounding in what the law actually is, and so they just get told any old nonsense. You know, in Leeds as an example, if that manager or experienced worker or whoever's doing the training is a wrong 'un, then everyone in that housing team will get the wrong information and they get told stuff that isn't true, and they'll then go and deprive people of housing that they've got a legal duty to. So you can kind of home in on issues like that. Now in Bedford we used it in a number of ways which have been quite interesting. So back in 2019 we'd had a spate of really bad decisions, and that's when we asked the first question. So we asked the question as an FOI, which is free to do. You just go on the council's website and search for freedom of information, so you'll get that way. And we literally asked the question of show us the council, the housing team's training manual or training log or training policy or anything like that, any training program. And we literally just asked the council, what is the training program? What training do these housing officers do? The response we got back was, we don't even keep a record of it. We don't know. And that actually led to a whole load of good things that came out of that. And following on from that, so that was kind of a general question about what training the housing officers got. We then had issues where, for example, I was working with a guy who had PTSD, very, very serious arthritis, and the housing officer had simply used a template non-priority decision. And basically there was a paragraph which said, I've carefully considered the impact of your osteoarthritis and your PTSD, and I've carefully concluded that you don't have a disability. And this guy very obviously had a disability, there's no doubt about it. And so in that case, I challenged the decision through the review process, got him housed, but I then asked a question, and I literally quoted that paragraph from that section 184 decision, which was just clearly just laughably bad, into a question to the Housing Committee and said, what training do your housing officers get about the Equality Act? Because they need to know about the Equality Act. They work with people with disabilities. They need to make decisions about how they're going to intervene and how they're going to provide a service to people within the Equality Act itself. And that was a great outcome, because what actually happened with that is the senior officer in the council rang me up and said, hey Mike, we identify this as an issue. Do you know anyone who does Equality Act training? And I was like, as it happens, I do. I know Doughty Street Chambers, who are maybe the best kind of organisation for this sort of stuff in the country. I guess that would be my opinion. So Bedford Borough Council housing teams end up doing a day's training with Doughty Street Chambers, who I would imagine would have been very, very forthright in terms of the importance of getting that stuff right and how the law actually works. And we've done it on other areas as well, but that's just a good example. So again, second question I would suggest asking is, what training do the housing officers get? And then you can funnel in on and kind of get more precise as you go through. Generally, housing committees will be every 2 or 3 months, so there may be 6 or 4 a year or something like that. And you don't have to stay for the whole meeting. You just literally go in and ask a question and clear off again. That's what we do. We just literally turn up, ask a question, and go and have a coffee. So that's what you can do there. And you can kind of maybe plan over the course of 12 months. Okay, we're going to look at the quality of the training the housing officers are getting, because they can't all be bad people. They must just be getting this stuff wrong because they've had bad training. So you can kind of funnel in and focus in on these kind of themes. So that's the second question I suggest you ask. These are in no particular order if you haven't noticed already. I did an FOI not too long ago where I asked the council how many of the temporary accommodation addresses were flagged as being a risk to staff and therefore they weren't allowed to loan work. So council, certainly Bedford Borough Council, has like a list of properties or a list of addresses which are known to present a risk to staff, and so they can't go on their own. That's the kind of premise of it. So I asked, made the FOI, how many was it? And I think it came back with something like 30 properties in the temporary accommodation stock were deemed to be unsafe for loan working. So I then took that FOI to the council housing committee and I basically asked the question, how can you ensure that this temporary accommodation is safe for vulnerable people when your staff can't even go there on their own during the day? So if they're not allowed to go in the daytime to go to these properties, how much more dangerous is it going to be for a vulnerable person who's basically living there all the time? And you don't always get a particularly sensible response in the meeting, but it kind of flagged this as an issue, and it fitted in with other stuff we were asking about how people were being put in unsuitable B&Bs or kind of blocks of flats and stuff like that. And it kind of just added to that kind of focus for the councillors to look at, okay, we can't just keep sticking people all into the same block. And I'm sure that's a theme we're going to continue on. In fact, I'm at a housing committee tonight and one of my friends is going to be asking a similar question, kind of looking at why do councils keep putting people with high support needs all into one block and expect there to be no issues. So that's just another question as well. You can see how you can use the FOI process and the housing committee question process in tandem to just highlight an issue and make a point. And essentially all I really wanted to achieve from that was just to show how there was a kind of a clear discrepancy in how the housing officers were viewing their jobs. So they were thinking, well, it's not safe for me to go there, on my own, and I'm a professional, council officer. But they somehow weren't able to connect the fact that that would also be dangerous, or would be significantly more dangerous for a person who was vulnerable, who had a history of being exploited or something. So, as I say, that's kind of the point I wanted to make on that question. Another interesting one around training, actually. So in Bedford in 2023, there were local elections, and so there's quite basically there's a new mayor, and that shifted the kind of the political balance a little bit. So it's now kind of, it's not Conservative majority, but there's the Conservatives are now the biggest party in the borough. And there were a few new councillors as well, and that led to a rejigging of the housing committee. So it's quite an interesting time for us. These things, these times do come up, so you do need to plan ahead for them. Where there's some new faces on the housing committee, which I think was a good thing. And so one of the questions we asked in the summer of 2023, so maybe a couple of months after the local elections, my wife actually asked this question. She asked the question, what training do housing officers get about the law? And she made the point that within the Code of Guidance, it says applications can be made, or homeless applications can be made to any department of the local authority and expressed in any particular form. And there's cases, I'll forget the name of the case now. It might be Edwards v Birmingham. It's one of them. I'll put a little correction on the screen if you want to look at it more. But it basically, in fact, it's not that one. It's an older one. But I'll put the name of the case on the screen in a minute. But basically, in that case, the judge said that there is no place for the game of pass the parcel in homelessness services. So it should not matter which department or which authority you go to, whatever. If you go to the wrong door, someone should take you to the right door, not just fob you off and kind of send you somewhere else. There should actually be some kind of formal referral mechanism. And in this theme here of what training to counsellors get, really we want counsellors to know what homelessness actually is, because lots of their constituents will be coming to them with problems of damp and mould, not being able to afford their accommodation, illegal evictions, all of these sorts of things which are very much homelessness issues. And yet, if counsellors aren't given good training about that, they will miss these opportunities to actually intervene in people's lives and kind of get them more assistance for them. So that question, at the time, it seemed to fizzle out. This often happens. So there was kind of a bit of a nonsense answer. We've had arguments with the councillor before about whether or not the councillor team are a department, and I would say yes, they are. But we haven't had to have it out with them about that yet. So nothing happens for a year, and then in the June committee 2024, there's an announcement saying, hey, we thought it's a good idea if actually councillors get training. So actually they're going to be having it in September, so I'm recording this September 2024. So again, that is not, you're not having to no one's losing face from that. It's not an adversarial kind of question. It's just looking to move councillors to be as informed as possible about homelessness. Now in Bedford we're lucky, but I imagine we're lucky in Bedford because one of the councillors is a manager of a Citizens Advice Bureau, so he really knows his stuff. But I would imagine in most councils there will be a councillor or two who actually do have really good knowledge, and you'll find this stuff out because if you watch these committees, spend any time watching them, you'll see which councillors know what they're talking about, which ones are just useless, and that will often lead to opportunities to meet with those councillors, kind of say what your concerns are, inform them about stuff, maybe get some information in return about kind of processes or whatever, and that will help you to kind of build up a kind of a more robust and useful set of questions to take forward in future. So yeah, I mean, watch this space, but I think we might see more of that, because at some point in Bedford, I do want to make the point that, as far as I can see, if someone goes to a counsellor's, whatever, advice surgery in Tesco or something, and tells them that they might be homeless and they need some help from the council, then that would constitute an application, and therefore the counsellor actually has a responsibility to forward that person's situation to the housing team to ensure that there's an adequate response. I'm not saying that counsellors should be doing inquiries or kind of making decisions. Obviously, that's not what I'm talking about, but I'm talking about counsellors being able to identify when someone might be homeless. So as I say, another question, it's not going to do any harm. It just kind of lets you gauge as well the kind of politics, because with these meetings you've got multiple political parties. Sometimes they'll be friends, sometimes they really won't be. In Bedford it's quite funny because the Lib Dems and the Conservatives are quite having a lot of public spats basically. And that can be useful as well, not always, but you can kind of, you realise that not everyone on that committee is going to be about, saving face and kind of defending the council's reputation. There will be councillors who actually, it's in their interest to make a political point that the council's failing on a particular issue like homelessness. So as I'm going to try and divide these videos up into 5 questions. So the 5th question I'm going to look at is another one which is, again, very vanilla in one sense, and that is around empty homes, because if you look at the big picture of ending homelessness, there needs to be more homes built, particularly social housing. You need to deal with rogue landlords, and rogue supported accommodation because they only do harm. But another important issue is actually getting empty homes back into circulation. And in Bedford, in the committee in June, the stats were given, and there was something like 900 empty homes in Bedford Borough, and there was something like 900 families in B&B in Bedford Borough. And one of the councillors made the point, seems like there might be a bit of a solution there. I mean, the ONS, the Office of National Statistics, says that there's 600,000 empty homes in the UK. So I don't know where that breakdown is, whether there's lots in London, I don't know. But clearly, you don't actually have to build houses to actually get workable homes coming back onto the market. So that was the kind of big picture of it. And our question on that has basically been, what steps can the council take to deal with empty homes? Because, again, it's not an adversarial question. It's just about kind of information gathering, getting the council to think about it, getting councillors to think about it. Because in the June committee in Bedford, I was quite frustrated because there was a agenda topic of empty homes, and effectively the senior officer in the council, her answer was effectively that, we've looked at our benchmarked councils. So councils benchmark themselves against other areas which are similar. So in Bedford, they benchmark themselves against Swindon and Medway. There might be some others as well, because they're similar size, similar distance from London, that sort of thing. And effectively the senior officer's answer was, we've checked against Medway and Swindon and we're not doing any worse than them, so everything's okay. And that was frustrating, because I'm like, we need to be more ambitious as an area, because it's not just about kind of making sure we're not worse than, some mediocre council, hundreds of miles away. We need to make sure we are doing the absolute best to make sure that residents get the services they should get, that's going to be best for the borough. So again, that's going to lead on to other questions. I think it's just another theme of this empty homes, but it's getting the council to say out loud and educate other councillors about what legal steps an authority can take to bring empty homes back onto the market. And I don't know what the answer will be. I know that compulsory purchase will play a part in it, but I would say there's more likely going to be ways in which there would be opportunities to engage with landlords to actually kind of look to bring those properties back online.